At some point, when you're interviewing for a CISO, you're not looking back at the degree. You're not looking back at their accreditations. That's all foundational. But what you're looking for, do they have the right sort of international experiences, experiences in driving change, experiences in talking to boards and their behaviors in doing that. Those things are what makes them a true leader, and you can actually build those and develop those over time.
This is KBCast.
Are they completely
As a
cybersecure?
primary target for ransomware campaigns,
Is
it's used to
security and
point out
testing and performance and scalability.
Risk and compliance.
We can actually automate that.
take that data and use it.
Joining me today is David G, advisor at JS Careers, Bain Co, and Emertel. And today we're discussing how to aspire and grow into a CISO. So, David, thanks for finally joining and welcome.
Thank you so much.
So, David, I want to talk about you just for a moment, and for people who perhaps don't know you, you've held some very heavy hitting titles. People were to look you up on LinkedIn. You've had some really big roles over the years. So I think you're probably the better person to ask around how to grow into, a CISO or CIO as a leader. So maybe let's start about building a career. And I would say my follow-on question to that would be, leadership is really, really hard. And sometimes I've found over the last, 12 or so years I've been in this space that people get into these leadership roles and they discover, well, actually, I don't really enjoy managing people. So share whatever you feel, what comes up in your mind when I ask you that question. I want to get into some of the specifics.
If I go right back, right, like let's go back to when I was in high school. Okay, so in high school, I played basketball and rugby and all that sort of things, right? But I'd love basketball as my key sport. I just excelled at it, and I was the best shooter in the team, and I was getting promoted, into big higher teams, and then at one point, get into the second and the first for 2 years, and then my coach said to me, David, can you stop being a shooter and just pass the ball, be the point guard? And I was like, what do you mean? I'm the best shooter. No, I want you to make others better. And that was my first sort of lesson in leadership, which is being out of your comfort zone and doing things that, that aren't natural to you, and then trying to make others better for the team rather than you being the star. That was my first sort of stretch moment where I was like, oh my gosh, can I do this? Can I actually be the point guard rather than the shooter? So to me, I really believe that was something that took me in good stead. So when I got into my career and, started, and by the way, I was married at 20 at university, and I was doing sort of odd jobs, but I had some principles I wanted to do. Besides the fact that I had a wife and kid to support, I really wanted to make sure that whatever I did, I enjoyed, and I didn't want to be stuck in any one industry or company or country. I had this notion. I didn't know how to do it, but to me, it was like, how do I have a career that enables me to keep learning, doing things, and keep, reinventing myself? And then if I can do that, then I won't get stuck in any place. And to me, that was sort of my principles I work with, and that kind of led me down the path of, being a CIO for 20 years and a CISO with HSBC, and then my last role, I did 3-4 years with Macquarie running tech, cyber, and data risk. So to me, the iterations was all about leadership and all around trying to reinvent myself and then trying to do different things, if that makes sense.
I used to work at a bank. That's how I started my security career historically. So, and I think everyone listening to the show has definitely heard me say that so many times, but you may not have known that. So I have a question for you considering your background and leadership. What I found at times working in a bank, there were people who were in these heavy hitting roles. I don't know if their leadership was genuine though. Have you seen that? And then tell me more about what genuine then leadership means to you.
In a recruitment standpoint, right? You're looking to classify people. So if I doing recruitment or screen candidates, for example, right? I'll be able to figure out, pretty quickly within 5 minutes, what's this person's DNA? What drives them? Are they a person? Maybe use some crude, which is, are they going to be a painkiller in terms of they're going to come in and actually make a big difference to the organization, or they're just a vitamin, right? If they're a vitamin, they're actually just something that's nice and might help progress things, but actually not going to make a big difference. And to me, leadership is about making the big difference, being the painkiller, going in, solving big problems and being willing to take the hits with that. Now, there are a lot of people who are in the art of survival, and their survival means I'm going to just stay under the pulpit, not taking any chances, speak up at all times and be visibly a leader. But actually, when it comes down to taking the hard yards or, taking the hits because someone in your team screwed up, that's not leadership to me. Okay. That's just being a manager. And so you see both of those type of people in the organizations, and there's statistically, you can say there's probably 13, 14% of people in organizations who are true leaders and want to do the hard yards, want to make a difference, want to transform and to make changes happen.
So what are the rest of the people doing? Just sort of sitting on the bus waiting for someone to drive them somewhere? What does that look like?
Life goes on. So we all have different motivations, right? Some people are motivated by just wanting to go to work to meet ends and pay the bills and have fun outside of work. Everybody's motivated a little differently. Different stages of your life, different stage of your career, you motivate differently. And so it just takes an army to have different people to make up an organization. You need to work yourself out in terms of what makes you tick and, what sort of person do you want to be. And therefore you're willing to make the sacrifices to, like, take my case, right? I worked across pharmaceuticals, insurance with MetLife in Japan. I was pharmaceuticals, Eli Lilly in Australia, China, Asia Pac, Japan, and US. So I moved, 5 countries. If you're willing to be uncomfortable and learn new things, be uncomfortable and grow because you have to speak different languages, deal with people who, may not get it the way you get it, and then work with that, try to understand that. That makes you grow faster, I think, because you're out of your comfort zone. You're thrown in the deep end, literally, with large teams, small teams, and both of those have different stresses, right? So to me, that's some people want to do that. Other people say, no way do I want to ever, be involved in something that's so different and foreign to me.
Okay, I got a couple of questions about corporates. I'm ex-corporate myself. I always say to people, I was a really bad employee. I'm definitely a better entrepreneur, definitely an entrepreneur at heart through and through. But I want to talk about climbing the corporate ladder. Now, and there's so many questions I have around this, but one thing that I observed in my career early on is someone could literally be hopeless in the corporation, but survive in terms of any, when there's a restructure, they always survive. There could be someone who was really talented in terms of their craftsmanship, but would always be the first person out the door because people didn't like them. So perhaps their social prowess or their social game wasn't as strong as the other person who maybe technically wasn't as good, but people liked them. So talk to me more about how people in these corporations can climb the corporate ladder with having a good social strategy and a good social game.
Good question. I mean, I wrote a book last year which came out called The Aspiring CIO and CISO, and then I talk a lot about soft skills. Now, to me, every individual is made up of all the above, right? So you've got a series of skills, knowledge, experience, and behavior. Skills, knowledge, experience, behavior. So to me, early in your career, you build up those foundations of skills and knowledge, things that you want to, you think is going to help you, whether that's a certification, accreditation, whether it's networking, whether it's now prompt engineering, skills, and then knowledge around how to do that across, for example, different industries. So then the realization is, and maybe to your point, is that what matters more is actually for the people who do succeed for the right reasons, because sometimes people succeed for the wrong reasons, your experiences and behaviors, right? Top of the equation. That's actually how you act, how you perform, how you do things when no one's watching, for example. That's part of your brand. And people see you being a leader to get stuff done, ask problems, solve problems, to bring your team on the journey with you, to, make change happen. That's all becomes, your experience and then your behavior to then, for example, say no to boards, say no to your boss, when then things are tough. All those things to me makes up what makes a great leader. And you're right, there are people who hide in the shadows and then they somehow survive. But listen, that's not the way to live. The way to live is to, get out there and do things that you enjoy, make some money on the way, but the money is not the motivation. It's me having the challenge and learning and, continuous learning, and then making people that you work with, better and the best versions of themselves. To me is so motivating. I just love that part of it where, you can, develop these people into CIOs or CISOs and or leaders because of their maybe some coaching you gave them or some tips you gave them, and without overdoing it, you can actually provide them little anchors and north stars that help them through the whole career.
So what about people that play the game though? Like, I mean, I've been in companies, it's like, oh, that guy's playing the game or she's playing the game. I hear that a lot. What do you think people mean by that person's playing the game?
Well, as you say that, people who do that in your organizations or done it in the past, right? They're playing by a different set of rules. They definitely get away with it sometimes. They maybe get promoted. Now, what that means is the people who they're working for perhaps are okay with that because they're, very loyal, they're very supportive. So therefore, they're not going to actually, ever feel challenged by that person. that's playing the game. Okay. And so I've seen many really bad examples, a lot of that bad examples of people playing the game. And to me, you see that and I go, that's just not how I want to live. That's not how I want to, see myself in any fashion from an integrity standpoint. So how do I try to just avoid even going down another path or, trying to acknowledge that's okay, because that's not okay. Those people get caught out eventually, maybe. But look, I think it's all about you living with yourself and knowing that you're doing what you believe is important and making a difference to the world.
So you said that you've seen some bad examples. Can you provide one?
Yeah, I can, and I won't name companies, but I was, interviewing for a very senior role, and I got some stakeholders involved, senior stakeholders involved that were in the C-suite, and said, "Can you interview this candidate because it's really important that you get buy-in on this candidate." And then they came around and said, "No, no, no. Can you actually instead of hiring this person, Bob, can you go and hire Carissa, who's not even interviewed for the job, right?" And I was like, "Oh, that's interesting. That person's not qualified. Actually, he's a bit of a muppet, to be honest." Okay. And I was thinking, okay, they're playing the game. They're actually wanting me to hire the wrong person for the wrong reasons. And I'm saying to them, I'm on a Zoom meeting saying, "Thank you very much for your input." And I completely ignored them because I know they're not playing with a straight bat, right? In terms of intent. What they wanted was the person to come into that job, senior role, and actually be a muppet, right? Be someone who would not do the right thing. And so that you get that. And so how do you then work through that in a graceful fashion, so you don't tell them tell them off or say that's inappropriate? Just move on with it, okay? And then do what's right rather than do what someone else is aiming towards.
So why would that person want to hire someone, to your words, a muppet? Is it because
Because it makes their life easy. Makes their life easy.
is it because they're not going to challenge them? Like, okay, well, I need this person.
Exactly. Now that's listen. I as I said, I do a bit of advisory work for Jay's careers from recruiting and tech and cyber and data, and we know that most people do want to do the right things in terms of, can I hire the best person possible, right? And then you put forward 5 candidates out of maybe 30, 40 you screened, and you go, well, actually, I don't like any of these people. Why is that? There's something else going on that I don't understand, because the candidates you put forward may be amazing, right? Amazing, got the experience, a background, the right sort of cultural fit, ticking all the boxes, but don't get the job. Then you realize actually they're a bit afraid of this person because they're a little bit too high powered, or they may be fearful that they might take their job. And, I learned it in my career, Chris, is that, I learned this from a guy who was, ended up being the global head of HR for Lilly Pharmaceutical, which is the largest pharma company in America right now. He said to me, "David, when you're hiring people, can you hire someone who could be your boss? Can you hire someone you think you can see that person being so good they can be your boss?" And I thought, wow, that's a really high bar, okay? Because you have to put them in a different light. And so when you think about that through that lens, you definitely will, look for amazing, look for, incredible abilities, etc.
Okay, I want to keep going on down this talk track for a little bit more. This is quite interesting. So I'm just going to use myself as an example because there's probably other people out there listening, and I think it's better to pick on myself than someone else. So when I worked in corporate, I spoke up a lot. Clearly, it makes sense. I'm a journalist and I'm asking you questions. This is how I've always been. People didn't like that, David. So then I don't think I was ostracized, but I sort of got the vibe that middle management started to feel a bit rattled by that. For someone of my caliber, I mean, obviously I don't work in corporate, etc. anymore. I don't have a boss, so maybe that's why I'm an entrepreneur. But how do those people succeed in these environments where you've got people out there, they don't want Carissa Breen in there asking questions and speaking up and challenging things? And, I was junior, I was an analyst, so it's not like I was a senior person. It seemed to get people at times, maybe I would rub people the wrong way, right? But then how does someone like me ever progress to be potentially in a corporation like that, to a management role, leadership role, if people are just trying to, keep my head under the water?
Yeah, it's a hard one to analyze, but I think look, I've met people of that sort of persona, right? I've met people of that persona who've been successful. Clearly, they've had to think about their approach somewhat to say, like, for all means challenge, for all means be yourself, because otherwise you'd think, why bother being here, right? But then how do you maybe, tweak your questioning a little bit to be a little bit less confrontational, to be a little bit more open-ended, to be somewhat, in the conversation for sure, rather than, because if you're either in the conversation or you then say, check out and say, oh, well, I'm not going to say anything because these people aren't going to listen to me, right? That would be a bad outcome. So how do you refine your behavior somewhat to be effective, rather than saying, okay, I don't want to change my core values. I don't want to change what I'm trying to get to. I think this objective is still right. How do I work with this conversation to get what I want out of it? Now, if I give you an example, right? I've always been myself a transformation person. How do I get stuff done? I've run program director, project director, getting things done. And to me, then I said, well, actually, I want to get things done, but why don't these people get out of the way and let me get faster, right? So that's the sort of change happening faster. And I realized actually that won't work. How do I then adjust myself to bring people on the journey? So I talk about this being one of my, 20, 25 year, improvement plans for myself. I want to be known as a transformation strategic person, which is what my brand is. However, my brand was also David doesn't always bring people with him because he's in a hurry. Okay, so how do I then still be, passionate, active, dynamic, bring people with me? So I over explain. I, take the time to repeat myself in different forums with the same message to say, is it okay? Do you guys and girls get this? Do you think there's other inputs I need to take on? And then by slowing down a bit, I get everybody buying into it. So therefore I can go faster because they're bought into it. So I've kind of learned there are ways to, if you like, improve yourself. You can take the input from others to say, this is what I have. If I did this approach, would that work with you? Would that, make you feel like you've, so I think that's a way to test the water. Certainly, in your case, you could have got a mentor to help you tweak yourself a little bit. But listen, it's a really interesting problem because leaders have strong opinions. So, to not have opinions actually would be counterproductive, but then how do you make it work in an effective fashion?
Yeah, I like that. And I think I've probably just got those leadership qualities. And I think that's if I perhaps loved the environment to the point I may not have been able to go out on my own like years down the track, right?
Mm.
So I sort of see it as more of a blessing in disguise. But one of the things I really want to understand is loyalty. Now, I'm very big on loyalty. When I back someone, like I really back them. And how do people stress test? Well, not stress test. It's not like it's a playing a game, but it's just more so how do you know for sure that people in your team or whatever it is or your counterparts, how do you know that they're loyal towards you?
Gosh, look, listen, I start with giving loyalty to everybody, right? So I hire a person, I give them trust. He or she gets my 100% trust, and I don't want to micromanage, but I do want to see results, right? If I see that I'm talking and I'm not seeing Carissa coming to the table, not seeing Carissa, getting the outcomes that I'm looking for, I'll start asking the question, right? So, but you've got to start with that premise around, to me, that's what a good leader does. Starts with I want a team to be strong and individually we're the best versions of ourselves. And so if I get in a little sidebar, if I can, and I talk about this in my keynotes and stuff, is around, look, as a leader, you inherit a team. Sometimes you get a chance to rebuild that team from scratch. Mostly you get a chance to just take what you have and make them better. So if I use the lovely example I always talk about as this little algorithm for leadership, which is really simple. You got a team of 4 people, right? You got David, and David's sort of 5 out of 10 some days. He's 6 out of 10 other days. He kind of plods along, right? You got Carissa, she's star, man. She works between 8 or 9 out of 10, and you got 2 other colleagues. Now, each of these colleagues, if I coach David to actually, be his best version, he could maybe be a 7 some days, other days a 6. But I'm trying to get him to be comfortable that I've got his back, right? That if he screws up by pushing the barriers a bit, he won't fall. I'll catch him. So he'll try to be the best version of himself. Similarly, Carissa can maybe aspire to be a 9, rather than just an 8. So if you then have each member operating the very best version of themselves, and they're actually then working as a team rather than chipping at each other and being bad, caustic behavior, then you get this very simple equation, which is Carissa's a 9, David's a 7, and there's a times multiplication sum, right? Guess what? As a leader, you get more done. You get more outputs, okay? Amazing transformation results. But when you got negatives or people operating at the lowest of their range, because we all operate different days. Our days, some days we're good, some days we're not so good. That's the truth, right? So how do you as a leader elevate people so they feel comfortable being out of the comfort zone and being in that space where they're maybe pushing the barriers way beyond where they normally would?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I like when you said like making people operate at, their best in their respective roles, right? I want to talk a little bit more about how do you feel when I ask you this question? And I know people have variants of opinions that Do you believe leaders are born, or do you believe you can train them?
I get back to it's kind of like the question around intelligence, right? Intelligence, people are born with a certain amount, but you can also develop that. And so if I talk about that first, if I say, okay, I was a 20-year-old dad, my wife and I, still married after all these years, right? We had a kid and we didn't kind of nervous about it. So we said, how do we grow this little being, to be safe and healthy and smart? And so we went down this path of trying different things, and we went to a little course, and we basically, my son was 3-4 months old, and so the course taught you to say, schools operate a certain paradigm, not 2 or 5 years old. So how do you actually teach the kids earlier? So therefore, we played Mozart. So you're going to play Mozart, listen to the best music. We showed my son, so we showed him Monet and Picasso and Renoir, and so we showed him the best. Okay, and then instead of just saying doggy, we'd say, oh, here's a photo of an Alsatian, here's a photo of a Dalmatian. We'd show them the different genres of dogs and so forth. So he became, very able to classify things. So when my son was 12 months old, he could read. He could read sentences. He could swim. He could, when he was, I think it was 15 months, 18 months, we did Suzuki Valley. He did all these things because we tried, because we didn't know, we tried to make him brilliant. And so to me, I learned my first lesson around people development as a 20-year-old, 21-year-old, that actually it doesn't matter what the school system says, you can be anything you want to be, provided you focus and use the right approaches. And so to me, leadership's the same, right? If you're born with certain skills and you're born with certain knowledge and experience, but actually if you push yourself, anybody could actually be a C-suite person. They just need the right coaching, the right ingredients, and understand, what is it they need to do around, say, experience and behavior side. Forget the knowledge and skills are important. That's kind of foundation. But at some point, when you're interviewing for a CISO, you're not looking back at the degree. You're not looking back at their accreditations. You're looking back at, that they worked in cloud for. That's all foundational. But what you're looking for is do they have the right sort of international experiences in driving change, experiences in talking to boards, experience, and their behaviors in doing that. Those things are what makes up a true leader, and you can actually build those and develop those over time.
Okay, so in terms of leadership qualities, now, so obviously, with Trump taking over, for example, it's going to use him as an example. Now, people either really not like him or they really like him. So, in leadership, do you think, especially in Australia, because I find Australians don't like rocking the boat a lot. I mean, corporate America, you've worked there, it's a bit of a different game, but do you think people feel uncomfortable with knowing that some people just may not like you and your leadership style? And then I also want to zoom out and then compare that between, corporate Australia versus corporate America.
Well, gosh, I think, Trump thrives on that. He loves the fact that people find him controversial. I think he likes to shock people. He likes to, I remember working at a firm, MetLife in Japan. It was, the CIO role, and it was MetLife's largest retail market globally. And the CEO was saying to me, hey, David, we need to think like Trump does. And I was a bit horrified, right? And what do you mean? He says, well, what would Trump do in this situation? And that is, okay, so maybe I don't want to be Trump. Maybe I don't think the way he does, but what would he do in this particular market or whatever situation? So that was another way of wearing a persona, if you like, and then trying to operate that way. Now, obviously, you meet people like that are a bit Machiavellian and so forth in your career. It's not always fun to work with people like that necessarily, but it is what it is. And then you got to figure out how do you operate, that fashion without actually becoming that person. Because I've also seen people who start imitating leaders, and because they like their style, I think because this is the CIO or whatever, I'm gonna act like that and even talk like that or have the same expressions. It's a form of imitation, if you want to call it that. And some people do that, but I see that and I kind of shudder internally when I see that, because it kind of shows that you may have a lot of self-doubt in a way that you're just imitating someone else rather than trying to be yourself.
Okay, that's interesting. So when the CEO said, what would Trump do? What does he mean by that? Does that mean like trying to polarize people, or what is that? What is that statement or slash question inferring?
It's a really scenario thinking, right? Which is normal person would go these paths. What would Trump do? Trump would do something different, very different. Now, I think that's you think about all the things you've seen recently and heard about recently. He may go a complete 360-degree view of where traditional people would go, and then so that's that sort of radical thinking. Now, that's really great for brainstorming. That's really great for, when you're thinking about out of the box. That's something that's, you would never think about Panama Canal or Greenland being part of America, for example, right? But that's how Trump thought about things. And, logically, he's got a view, right? Doesn't mean there's right or wrong. It just means he's got a radical view of things. And so if you are trying to develop strategy, then that's not a bad place to start with because you want to have a clean slate.
So the other thing I'm curious then to know, just to build on this a bit more, the interview I did with Shannon Sedgwick, as you know, we spoke about like Australians, even from a geopolitics perspective, we're fence sitters. We don't like to rock the boat. Whereas Americans are more like, to your point, a bit more radical, right? So would you say, in your experience, it's not about which one's better, but which one can be more effective? Because sometimes, even Australian politics, people are obviously saying like, oh, like, I don't even know what this politician thinks. They don't really have an opinion. Whereas to Trump, it's like, this guy has an opinion. Now, again, some people really like that. Some people really don't like it. But which one would you say, in terms of an outcome, is better?
Oh gosh, what I would maybe replay is that I did a MBA at Macquarie Graduate School a long time ago, but I remember the teacher was telling us around differences between American style management style and Australian management styles. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And he said, actually, Americans are all about personality, not about integrity. In Australian management are the opposite, which is it's all about integrity, not personality. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I get it. Which is integrity is all about doing the right thing, right? And personality is all about being charming. And so like, I kind of worked in many different, Eli Lilly, MetLife. I worked in many American-based companies, and I said that's kind of true. You're meeting these amazingly charismatic CEOs who can talk and sell ice to Eskimos. For God's sake, they're amazing. Do they all have the great integrity to match that? Some did. Some actually were just outstanding, right? Like sort of like Obama level, and others were, oh my gosh, I wouldn't trust this person at all. And so I kind of believe that theory is kind of true in terms of trying to break down, the vast difference between Australia and the US.
But in terms of getting the outcome, would you say that, I mean, I know the answer depends, but do you think having that bit more radical approach better in terms of outcomes, or?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. If you look at, America, despite its problems and issues it has, it's still most patents in the world come from America. And so clearly there's some really smart thinking there and some, great design thinking, some different innovation that comes out of that place. So I would say that works for that aspect of America for sure. Now, does that translate necessarily into corporate America? Sometimes I've seen that work, not always, but sometimes it does work that way. But obviously in the Valley and places like that, these guys are very good at that. And there's a lot of tribes that sit there that are amazing in this space.
So I want to talk to you a little bit more about vision. Now, you would know in your career, there's people out there that talk a big game, but you got to play it, right? So what have you seen in your career around vision and then communicating that? Because in journalism, I look at what companies are saying, and sometimes they talk about all these things they're going to do, but then there's no follow on. So, and that goes into the integrity piece. So how does that sort of look from how you see it with your background?
Yeah, like I worked for some amazing organizations in my career. And so, strategies and strategic planning and having that big picture view, and then saying, okay, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to build, the organization between here and the next 10 years, these sort of changes. I've seen some incredible strategies developed, which said, here's our 10-year plan to grow. Let's take the example, the China market. Okay, I was in China back in 1999 when China was an idea, and we were trying to convince people to invest into China. Now, of course, China's had the rise. It's maybe flattened out somewhat, right? But during that period of time, no one believed that this was going to happen. That there's going to be, China would be such a big market and now number 2 in the world. But back then it was, below Germany, UK, etc. Number 20 or 25, I can't remember. But we had this long-term plan that says, okay, if we can do these things and execute and measure that on the way and make these kinds of specific investments in different markets with different products and different staffing resources, we'll get that growth plus some. And that, again, that strategy, for example, with Lilly in China, back in 1999 was a 2010 plan. And we thought that China would be, for Lilly would be number 4 in the world by 2010. And we were wrong because number 2 by that stage, right? And so we were wrong by a factor, even though we had sort of 3 scenario curves around growth. So I think I've seen some good examples where people have got the strategy and had the execution ability to actually go and do that and back it over, sort of a long-term view rather than being tactical. I think I've seen probably more good examples than bad examples, to be honest.
So then you talk a lot about when people get a new senior leadership role, they've got to have a bit of a 90-day plan. So is there anything that you can sort of share? Because again, that goes into what we just discussed before. You want to be able to back it up. So everyone can talk a big game, but how do we actually play it and actually get those outcomes?
Got it. Listen, it's so important. Like I said, I spent 15 years at Eli Lilly, as the CEO for Australia, then China, then Asia, back in Hong Kong, then up in Japan and the US. And so every time I moved, it was 15 years, 5 jobs. So I kept moving roughly a bit every 3 years. And every time I moved, I didn't take my team with me. I didn't have that abilities, to bring people with me because they were different countries. And so, but I built up a methodology, which I started writing down and say, here's my 90-day plan. Okay, here's what I'm going to be focusing on. It's one page. And by the way, it's plug my book. It's in the book for CIOs and CISOs. So across people, process, technology, where do I want to spend my time in my first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? And by definition, where do I don't want to spend my time, right? Because you want to be very focused. So I first built this up many, many years ago. Then I wrote about it, and you probably see some CIO.com articles that I wrote this on. And then but what I would do is I would actually build this plan, call it a draft plan, even when I've been interviewing for a job, for example, right? I'm interviewing for a job, and Carissa says, hey, Dave, what's your 90-day plan? I said, well, actually, I've got a plan here. Now, I'm a bit sheepish because I don't yet know your organization well enough to know this is true or not, but here's what I want to do around, different things. So I want to go and review the strategy, perhaps, revise that or tweak it. I want to make sure that the stakeholder engagement is efficient. So the right input coming back and forth, and then we're getting input into our strategy. I want to look at hygiene things that are perhaps not quite right that could be fixed. So there's different things you could do there. And then you also need to look at the team, right? What team do you have? Review that, figure out what DNA is missing and how do I tweak it? Because you may not be able to just sack everybody, right? So how do I tweak it and make changes so people understand what the requirement is? And so by going and putting it in the paper, as I entered into an organization, I would actually share that in my town halls my first day and say, here's what I'm planning to do. I want to be very focused on this. So you're kind of setting a brand, which is, hey, David wants to get this stuff done. He's concerned about strategy, about resources, about hygiene, about metrics, and all these different things, right? And you brand yourself, but you also start to tell them, I care about this. So therefore they should care about this. I share that same plan with my boss, my peers, and, and the executive ranks and say, hey, as I meet with you one-on-one, I want to make sure that I'm, fulfilling what you see is important here. Now you're going to get people suggesting, can you also add this or can you take that off? Which is, you may want to tweak that depending on your situation, but it sets you up to success because if you think about these jobs, CEOs maybe last 4 years, CISOs maybe 2 to 3 years. How do you try to be the one who lasts a little bit longer by actually starting strong and knocking out the park from day one?
So from your experience, where do you think people are spending their time? I think at the start you said, I'm going to be focused on this, but there's also, I'm going to be writing down what I'm not going to be focused on. So where would you say people are spending time on things perhaps they shouldn't be from your experience?
It's a great experience. I wish this was visual because I'll show you a slide. As I'm doing the keynotes, I actually have a slide that says, this is a day in the life of a CIO, day in the life of a CISO, okay? And they feature my book too. But it then says, here's all the things. You think about a CIO or a CISO, you got all these things coming at you, right? It's a board presentation, it's a regulatory requirement, it's a transformation project, it's a some sort of portfolio reporting, it's an incident happening from the other side, it's sort of a stakeholder engagement. You got 12, 15, 20 things around you in your day coming at you. Now, obviously, some of those things you care about more than others. Other things will just take your time because they do. And so as a leader, you've got to make those choices to say, actually, you know what, I just need to not do this and this and this and just focus on this today. Because that to me is going to make a difference. That to me is going to be what I call a moment of truth, right? Where I've actually picking the right thing to focus on. And when you're the CISO or CIO, there's no one coaching you on this stuff, right? So everybody's screaming at you and saying, I want this, audit wants this, risk guys want this, my boss wants this, my stakeholders want. How do you keep everybody happy? You can't. So how do you figure out actually, what's really important today is I focus today on this. I'm sorry. I know your board report's important. I know this is important, but actually we have a pretty serious incident right now. So I need to focus on that. And other things, we'll just have to just slide because I can't do that. That takes a bit of courage and a bit of sort of your own decision-making ability to make a quick decision and say, okay, today, this is going to define me. I'm going to do this, get this done. Then if I do that, I'm doing the best thing for the organization.
So, David, I just want to quickly touch on, you talk about moments of truth, survival skills. What's that?
Oh, kind of touched on it a minute ago, but look, in the day, right, is that if you're a CISO, you don't have many comfortable moments in a day. You've got a lot of stress. Your team's under stress. You have incidents and issues to deal with. You've got, too many projects to handle, staff with shortages, right? So survival skills operate at two levels. One, individually, how do I manage this stress, but don't appear to be stressed and just be able to think clearly, sensibly, and make the right decisions. And, that means I'm going to be open to my team's input because I want the strength of the team, but also be strong enough to make the decisions that, that matter because at the end of the day, right, you're going to be accountable for that. So I think that's the first aspect. And then you want to make sure that from a survival skill standpoint that you're helping your team. Because your team's, if they got the religion with you, working with you, right, they get your agenda, they get your change agenda, they get that they need to be pushing on things. So they will also create some friction. So how do you help them with their moments of truth as well to back them up, right? So now sometimes your team will screw up and maybe do things that create friction and noise that you might agree with the other party, but how do you then work through that with them so you can, help everybody get to the best outcome by pushing the barriers a bit and knowing, this is the part, we think about elasticity, right? And resilience. How do you, like a rubber band, stretch back and forth somewhat, but don't break? That's the important part.
So, David, do you have any sort of closing comments or final thoughts you'd like to leave our audience with today?
Look, I'm just about to go live with an announcement about a fun sort of not-for-profit thing I'm going to work on. So I've been working the last few years as the chairman for the FSISAC, which is the financial services sort of group that works around sharing cyber intelligence. And I've just been asked to be an ambassador for the CI, Critical Infrastructure ISAC group. Now, we think about this is all around critical infrastructure. If I remember rightly, there's 12 different sectors. So, in the day, it's power, it's water, it's networks, it's data centers, right? Hospitals. All these things we rely on to be, operation resilient as a CIO or CISO. If we don't have the power, electricity, all that stuff working, data working, then actually we can't operate. And it doesn't matter how good our plans are and what we invest in. So there's sort of ambassador roles trying to help us to work as across the silos, if you kind of call it that. How do we work across the silos to get intelligence and share intelligence across industries so we can actually protect Australia better than we do now? And, so we work in our silos and our silos being our companies, but how we didn't operate more broadly. That's pretty exciting if we can start to do that because I think it's a really, going to be a massive challenge going forward in future years around how do we protect ourselves without giving up our individual concerns, but actually more broadly, Australia as an entity will come under more attacks, I think.
This is KBcast, the voice of cyber.
Thanks for tuning in. For more industry-leading news and thought-provoking articles, visit kbi.media to get access today.
This episode is brought to you by Mercsec, your smarter route to security talent. Mercsec's executive search has helped enterprise organizations find the right people from around the world since 2012. Their on-demand talent acquisition team helps startups and mid-sized businesses scale faster and more efficiently. Find out more at mercsec.com today.